Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights outtake episode, the discussion on Hobby Hotline about gambling and Pete Rose's reinstatement. I actually responded to the episode that I had done previous to that on this Hobby Hotline panel, addressing some of the questions that I'd received, some excellent questions and comments and opinions, and not to set the record straight, but just to further clarify, it came up in that context. I was going to do a separate episode about that, but much of it was covered in this. Thanks to Orlando and Logan, my co-hosts. Always good to see Logan, and especially good to see Orlando back, that he's had successful surgery, and that's a wonderful thing. Thanks sponsors: Topps Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. Check out Hobby Hotline when it comes out. It's better when it's live, but this is about 14 minutes of excerpts. So thanks, everybody, and here it is. Gambling is here to stay in the world of sports. So the old rules of no gambling, no betting, all that stuff, it's difficult now because all these gambling apps and entities are sponsors of the various sports. But what needs to be punished rather than just gambling, although gambling by players on baseball games or managers or anybody associated with the game, it's the rigged gambling. It's the throwing games. Now, I've never heard anybody accuse Pete Rose of even doing less than his best. He was over the speed limit. He gave it all he had. And if he would have pulled back just a little bit, I think that would have been noticed. So he gets a walk and he just saunters down to first base. I don't think that happened even when he was 40 years old. He was a hustler. He gave it all he got, and I respect that. But he did bet on the game. There's some who think he did bet, not just when he was a manager and not just on the Reds, but as a player. And he was a player manager for a little while too. But that's all been washed away in the agreement that he made to be permanently ineligible. So it wasn't a lifetime ban. He was on the permanently ineligible list. I was thinking it was a lifetime ban. He died. So he was banned while he was, no, he was permanently ineligible. And that's why the language is that Shoeless Joe and these other guys, many of whom are not very worthy at all, because they really did throw games. My nephew is at West Point, and they have an honor code there. And it's not just about lying and cheating or stealing, those kind of things. It's about not reporting those who do. So you can be kicked out of these academies if you knowingly look the other way when somebody's doing the wrong thing. The Black Sox, a lot of people knew, and potentially Shoeless Joe knew. Now, maybe he was confused and not that well educated, but it's wrong to throw games. Everybody can agree that's wrong. To bet on games, society now is saying that's benign, that we bet all the time. At any rate, I think Pete's going to get in the Hall of Fame, and that's deserved in terms of his on-the-field exploits. One of the great players I got to watch when I was going to a lot of games back when I was younger. If Pete Rose did throw a game or give less than his best, which I think is against everything he stood for and everything we ever saw. I bet he was betting on himself and betting on his team. That's still not right, but it's way different than throwing a game. If he was throwing games, he does not deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, no matter how many hits he got. But I don't think he did, and I don't think most people think he did either. All the discussion about making the hall smaller, and I joke about relegating like they do in soccer, that we'd pull out some. It's never about the bad guys. It's about the not so great players. It's Harold Baines, who is a great guy, but not a superstar. But it's not about let's get rid of the bad apples. It's let's get rid of the guys that were not the top rank of players.
When you look at Pete Rose, I never saw Ty Cobb play, but everything I've read on Ty Cobb, Pete Rose reminds me of Ty Cobb. That aggressiveness, that will to win, the love of baseball, those things take Hall of Famers over the top, above and beyond average players. Ty Cobb and Pete Rose, similar style of play, in my opinion.
I agree. If you look at the biographies of Ty Cobb, not all of which are unbiased, he has some detractors as well. The other thing is Pete Rose actually had a lot of power, and Ty Cobb did too, but they chose to hit for average and to hit singles and doubles and not long fly outs. They weren't weak, They weren't Babe Ruth, but Pete Rose understood how to win, and that was not just getting hits, but getting on base and contributing on defense at whatever position he was. And nobody ever accused Ty Cobb of not deeply wanting to win at any cost.
He just wasn't liked by a lot of the players. And Pete Rose was the same. A lot of players just didn't like Pete Rose, just the way he was.
If you had a Hall of Fame vote, would you vote for Rose and Jackson for the Hall of Fame?
Hypothetical question. If they want to put me on the committee, actually, I'm not going to dodge it. I probably would. But it's going to be subject to the committee, which is 12 or 15 electors, several of whom are former players that played with or against Pete or are very aware of him personally. So I think he's going to get in. And I think if somebody doesn't vote for him, if he doesn't get in, it's not that there'll be death threats on the committee, but they'll be freaked out. The world will be freaked out if he doesn't get in now that he's passed. But it's going to be in a couple of years, guys. It's not imminent. And he's not going to be on the same ballot with Shoeless Joe. Shoeless Joe will be in the dead ball group or whatever it is. They have a 4-year rotation. But yeah, I would vote for him based on what they did on the field, especially Joe Jackson, probably especially Pete Rose too. It was about punishment fitting the crime. The guy has passed, and now his stats live on. There's no asterisk on his stats. He's a legend.
Even though Pete said he didn't want to be put in after he passed away, I think he definitely will be voted in. But like Dr. Jim says, it's going to be a while. That committee doesn't meet until December 2027. So we're still years away. There's going to be pressure put on these voters to get Rose in and to get Jackson in.
I think the next agenda for a lot of people is Bonds and Clemens and McGuire.
Philly Joe says the Baseball Hall of Fame is a joke when two of the greatest players are not in based on alleged PED use. I agree with that. I think they need to be in as well if they're going to allow Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe in eventually.
Maybe eventually, Logan, but it's a different situation because they definitely cheated. They enhanced their ability using the PEDs. So their stats are tough to look at. McGuire, would he have hit over 70 home runs if he didn't use PEDs? Those are the questions that are going to come up with that. And I think that's going to take some more years.
If Pete gets in December of 27, then the conversation will begin. Obviously, if they take a hard line and don't let Pete in, then, that's going to be the ethos of the day. They're not going to let Bonds in either. But if Pete gets in, it's going to show a more relaxed. Now, the criticism I got in my episode about Pete Rose was when I mentioned our president, Donald Trump. And if I even mentioned the name, some people just say, why are you mentioning him? I said, I was mentioning him in the context of society giving second chances. Here's a guy who's been indicted. He's been bankrupt. He's been president. He's been impeached. And then he's been out. And then still, when he was elected last November, he got more than half of the popular vote. And so people are forgiving nowadays. That's something that wouldn't have happened 50 years ago. Now people are saying, yeah, he paid his time, he paid his dues, all that stuff. And so Bonds, I think, is going to get in. Like we say, Bonds was a Hall of Famer before his head got big.
Right. And people are forgiving. Time heals all wounds sometimes. Yeah. And times change, too. People's opinions change overall. But I do agree Bonds would have been a Hall of Famer, even without using the PEDs.
His worst year is better than Harold Baines' best year.
Exactly.
Vintage car collector, put Bonds in, but strip him of his all-time home run record. What do you guys think about that?
I think Bonds would be okay with that. It's like putting an asterisk on Roger Maris for all those years. Everybody knew. That was political. But he's not in the Hall of Fame. They put him in, and then they put some asterisks there. He's in.
Yeah, his all-time record may not have happened if it wasn't for the PEDs. So I do think that you need to make a note of that somehow, some way in the Hall of Fame. It added home runs to his career for sure. How many? Who knows? 10%, 20% more, maybe 30% more home runs. Because definitely he blew up. He was a skinny guy When he first started, look at his cards, and then look at the end. His head was huge. A totally different guy from the beginning of his career to the end of the career. And people like, let's say, Canseco, who obviously used PEDs throughout, he hit almost 500 home runs. Probably would have never even come close to that if it wasn't for the PEDs. I don't think he was as gifted as somebody like a Bonds.
The power of a good nickname. Not just Charlie Hustle. If Joe Jackson was Joey Jackson or Joseph Jackson and not Shoeless Joe, would there be the same mystique? He's going to have a different mystique because he sat out for so long. And like Orlando said, he was a first rank, one of the first guys you would look for if he was in the set. The biggest smile in the hobby right now is probably Jeremy Lee, Sports Cards Live, who famously bought the 14 Cracker Jack Shoeless Joe at a world record price, which now is looking like a better and better deal. But yeah, both those guys should go up. Now, I don't think Eddie Sycott's going to go up.
No.
I don't think Buck Weaver's going to go up. Good players, but they were implicated in a different way. And Happy Felsch, those guys already had a following because of the mystique of the Black Sox.
Remember, Joe Jackson had a 356 lifetime batting average. I don't think we're ever going to see some lifetime batting average over 350 again. He had the stats from the beginning, whether he's a Hall of Famer or not.
Will we see more cards of Pete Rose now and cards of Shoeless Joe? I think anything's possible.
What if Pete set aside a bunch of sticker autographs and put them in a vault? He may have passed up Bob Feller for signing because he had a continuous motion thing in Las Vegas, a line all day, every day, I think. And he still had a legible signature.
Pete Rose would sign baseballs, gambling, or I gambled, and whatever you wanted him to write, he did. They're just so readily available. And I agree with Dr. Jim. I think Pete Rose passed up Bob Feller in autographs.
Here's Brody. He says PEDs don't help Bond's incredible eye.
Great point by Brody. A lot of times, I think if the umpire saw that Bonds wouldn't swing, they'd call it a ball.
The all-time leader in walks? Are they going to put an asterisk on that?
That's true. Does Pete Rose have a better chance than Bonds because he did own it?
Guys, here's the thing. Pete Rose, according to Major League Baseball and according to the investigators, Pete didn't fully own it. He partially owned it. Thought that was best, and he agreed to the permanent ineligibility in order to not have a finding that he bet on baseball. Okay, so my guess is Bonds would be thinking about something like that to partially own it. Andy Pettit didn't partially own it as much as he said, hey, I just used these PEDs when I was trying to recover from injury, and I just want to admit it and get it out of the way. Clemens, silent. I didn't do anything. So if Bonds or Clemens or McGuire, if they partially owned it in some way that they could keep some face, but I don't know how they do that. But Pete didn't fully own it, according to the John Dowd guy.
Bo says Sosa, yeah.
Sosa question mark.
Sosa partially apologized to the Cubs saying he made mistakes. So maybe that's how you say it, is I made mistakes.
But like Dr. Jim said, those are all partial things, not completely denying it. I think Canseco was the only one that said, yes, I did it, and for sure, and these guys did it with me and all that. I think he was probably the most open one. But when you talk about some of those guys, let's say Rafael Palmeiro, he never admitted he lied in Congress. And here's 3,000 hits, 500 home runs. He'll never get in, and I'll never vote for him because he just totally lied. That's the only reason I give Canseco some credit, because at least he admitted it.
He also named names.
Clemens misremembered it.
Yeah, I've always been of the opinion that if you make a mistake, just say, I made a mistake.
Guys, Logan, are you married?
Yes, sir.
Orlando, you married?
Yes.
Okay, I'm married too. Happily married. Okay, let's say we're all happily married and not a card show, but for a weekend, the three of us separately, we take off. We don't tell our wives where we're going. We leave on Friday morning, but it's not a card show. It's definitely not a card show. You turn off your cell phone for the weekend. You come back Sunday night, and your wife goes, Orlando, Logan, Jim, where have you been? And you say, I made mistakes. Come on. Is that going to work? That would be ridiculous. That's not an apology that I made mistakes. Your wife is going to say, okay, and what would those mistakes be? If you want to come back in the house, tell me what's going on. I made mistakes. You have to be more articulating, or it's not an apology. You can't seek forgiveness for unknown whatever. You can't plead the fifth with your wife. I don't want to incriminate myself. This is a family situation with the fraternity of Major League Baseball. It's competitive. Everybody's in this together and just making mistakes. I think you've got to fess up more than that. And to me, that'd be a deterrent. And Pete Rose, like I said, partially fessed up and substantially fessed up.
Is doing all right.